Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first, I always want to tell students just study abroad. I think it's just an invaluable experience, and obviously we want you to study abroad with us in Costa Rica, but it's just important. Study abroad is a great opportunity to step outside your comfort zone, and I think that's one of the great parts about college of its in and of itself. But this is kind of that big stepping out. A lot of students tell me that they want to travel when they finish, when they graduate, and the idealistic professor in me thinks about, I want them to, maybe this is planting that seed for them. Maybe by them coming on a study abroad experience, coming with us, that it'll plant that seed. I think a great instance of people stepping out of their comfort zone is food, right? That's comfort for so many people and so many cultures. Is that if you have a full belly, you tend to be pretty well off. And so I think about our first morning in Costa Rica. We wake up really early and we're headed to the coffee tour towards the Copa Dota. And as we're going, we pull off to a roadside kind of restaurant, and you walk in, and nobody there speaks English, and the students, and it's really awesome, our guides there just kind of let us go, and students just start pointing at like things that they want to eat. And I think it's just an amazing opportunity to watch them all just kind of stare at each other, and they try to get things that they're comfortable with, and they start laughing, and they get this plate full and they go eat, and they don't like everything, but a lot of it they're like, man, this is really good, and it's really authentic Costa Rican food. And I think that is just a great first morning for these students, because when you land in San Jose, I mean, by all accounts, I mean, you're someplace different, but it's not drastically different than some of our cities. And so this is that first kind of exposure to something different, and it's in food. That later on that day, we go to this beautiful lunch spot, and a couple of students ordered fried fish, and they were expecting like a nice fried fillet, but they fried the whole fish. And they kind of were shocked at first, but they, just all kind of, everyone laughed there, and everyone just kind of like dove in. And by the end of it, a couple of students tried like the fish eyes and ate some of the brain, and they were just like really, and it was just this unique bonding experience, because everyone was unfamiliar with the food. And so, and that was only, a lot of other people had, what we would consider more traditional type of, rice and some beans and plantains. But that's just a great example of how studying abroad can push you outside of your comfort zone for something that we tend to value, like food. And so that's just one reason why I think it's important to study abroad. I also think it's important to, challenge yourself, to be in another country where you might not know the language. And a lot of times a smile, a little bit of laughter, and a little bit of understanding can go a long way. And I think that is where a lot of students really kind of are uncomfortable, but as soon as they start engaging in that process, they really open up, and they just become more aware of the value of language, the value of food, when they're staying in houses that, by our standards here would be relatively rustic at best, but they're there and they just appreciate it, and it's a different type of value that they come away with. And for me, I think that's just an awesome opportunity that not just study abroad, but specifically us for the Costa Rica program we get to offer. Well, I mean, ecotourism, I mean, it's one of those, it's a relatively new kind of field of study. It's been in practice for, some people can say for quite some time, as long as tourism, but in terms of kind of defining it, it's a relatively new discipline. With that being said, there's some complication in terms of how it's defined. There's really not a great clear, like, this is, the academic community has decided that this is the definition. And that's okay. I think that's part of kind of the great part, is that, a trip like this is that we're living it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So in terms of ecotourism, it's really thinking about sustainable travel, where you're intentionally engaging in the natural environment with the local culture. That's the premise of ecotourism and kind of its main foundation or pillar. Why Costa Rica for ecotourism? It really only makes sense because Costa Rica is arguably the birthplace for not necessarily ecotourism, but the impact of ecotourism. And what I mean by that, sure, Costa Rica did a lot of things in order to help them kind of be the economic and cultural leaders of Central America. But one of those was ecotourism. It has the land mass about the size of West Virginia, but it holds 5% of the world's biodiversity. And so they recognized that treasure. And I think it was as people were coming there, they started realizing we've got something. And I think about people go to Europe to see big, historic buildings, to see the museums, to see these historic cities. Those are the treasures of a lot of Europe. Costa Rica, it's their natural environment. That's their treasure. And they've done a lot to protect that. One case when we were rafting down the Rio Savegre was a great chance when what they were talking about, our guides were talking about how they wanted to dam the Rio Savegre. Now, this is one of the cleanest rivers in the world, but they wanted to dam it for power. But most of that power was going to go to Panama. And they were just like, no, like, this is our treasure. You cannot do that. And so that's just one example of how they've tried to protect it. But through tourism, they've built a lot of infrastructure. It's a really safe place to travel. You've got a lot of the more eco lodges are owned locally by the local people, and that's one of the pillars of ecotourism as well. And so I think that makes a lot of sense to go to Costa Rica because it has really stimulated and transformed that country's kind of economy as a result of people traveling there. I mean, for its beaches, its beautiful mountains, its great biodiversity, and so that is why people go to Costa Rica. And so we are fortunate that when we're traveling, we aren't going to these, people go say, oh, you're going to Costa Rica, you're going to Arenal or, Tamarendo or Jaco, these big, beaches or, volcano. And we don't. And we do it with all intentionality. I mean, we're going off the beaten path. I mean, we're hiking for 4 days through the rainforest, and the part of it's the clouded rainforest into the rainforest. And it's awesome because students realize they are different and they get to see that. We're staying with local families, eating at their in their kitchens with their families, and we kind of travel on down and we hike right to the Rio Savegre. So we start in the mountains, we hike to the Rio Savegre, and then we take that within a few kilometers of the ocean, and then obviously we go to the beach and spend a few days there. But I think that's awesome, is that we're able to experience Costa Rica through mostly human-powered travel, and I think that is, I think that's what makes us relatively, unique. And we get to see the mountains, the beaches, the rivers, and all of that is what brings people to Costa Rica. So I think, with any study abroad, I think the learning, in my opinion, truly occurs just by going, right? You're going to learn more by going than I would ever be able to teach you about this same topic in the classroom. And so I think that's why study abroad is so powerful, is if I was to try to do a course on Costa Rican ecotourism, I'm sure we could do it. You'd see a lot of beautiful pictures. We would have guest speakers. We'd be able to do all that. But that's not going to be as meaningful as actually experiencing it. So I think that's important to understand for the academic component, is that the foundation is going. As part of what we do is we pick one of the textbooks, is kind of one of the premier textbooks in ecotourism, where we read several chapters on there. We read one about ecotourism in Costa Rica. The whole chapter is about Costa Rica, and we also do a chapter that's about the United States. And I think that's a really important chapter that we have them read, because most people think ecotourism have to go somewhere, another country. But we have a huge economic driver in tourism first, but in ecotourism. Think about all the guides and outfitters and everybody that takes people into our national parks. I mean, that's our greatest treasure. It's the greatest, it's the best idea we've ever had. And so I think students, they can relate to that because US, and then as they're in Costa Rica, they relate to the chapter we're reading on Costa Rica. We also have them do these mini historic presentations where we talk about the economy, we talk about the history, we talk about the biodiversity. And fortunately, we have our local guides there who can then kind of bring more life to it. And sometimes we'll have debates about it and conversations. And it's typically about an hour each day, hour and a half each day. We also have them journal, and we give them very poignant kind of topics they need to cover in their journals, to kind of have them reflect on some of the things they've read, some of the things they've seen, and some of the things we've discussed. And then ultimately we kind of round it out when we get home with with a paper that really kind of brings it all together. That's the idea behind the paper. And they also have to do a presentation to one of our classes about what is ecotourism. So we're asking them to, because most of our students don't know what ecotourism is when they take the course. It's one of the things that people, it's not just for recreation students. And even recreation students don't necessarily know what ecotourism is. They probably experienced it, and even a lot of other people have experienced it. But we take them, we put them in a place where they're experiencing it. We've read about it. They're presenting little tidbits about it. We are discussing it, journaling, and then they get to wrap it all together with a presentation to say, now, this is what ecotourism is. Everybody who graduates from Ohio University is going to have a Ohio University degree of some sort. The study abroad experience is a differentiator. And so I think that's important. We are in a global world now. Borders just really, they exist geographically, but intellectually and economically it just doesn't. And so I think it's starting to, it shows employers that, hey, I've taken the chance, I've engaged in another culture, I've stepped outside of my comfort zone. I think that's an important piece. I've said it, many, many times. I just think, stepping out of your comfort zone is just a huge thing. Being uncomfortable and stretching that, and then becoming comfortable. I give this great example is, for some, we had one person or two people on this past trip ever go abroad. And so, even so, people are, it's like little things, like going to the bathroom. What's the food like? Once I land, what's that going to be like? And, it's an opportunity for them now. I bet you every single student, if I would go back to and say, hey, I need you to go to X, Y, and Z, they would be, no problem. I can figure it out based on this experience. And so I think that is arguably, in my opinion, the biggest. And it also depends on where people go, right? I think the other aspect is, and this really exists with our experience, because from the time we all get together that evening after everyone's landed till that morning when we leave, we're together as a group. And so for us, that bonding as a group is really valuable. It's a shared experience that they'll always kind of have for each other. And I think that's a really important piece, because oftentimes by the time you get into, later on in your academic, life in college, you tend to hang around with the same friends. You tend to hang around with those that are in your major. And so we have all different majors. I think we had 5 or 6 different majors on this last trip. And so it's awesome to be able to look at a singular subject and people come at it from all different lenses, whether it's from business, hospitality, from recreation, social work. Everyone's looking at it just a little bit differently and figuring out how to apply it back to their disciplines and their worlds. And I think that that's critical thinking. That's hopefully one of the things that we as an institution of higher ed are delivering to our students, is helping them gain that. And so yeah, I think that's the ultimate outcome.
That's perfect.
A lot of times people ask about language. You don't really need to know it. One person knew Spanish. I know enough to get myself in trouble. So I think that's kind of one of those misnomers. Financial students a lot of times worry about the finances involved, and it is a very real part of it. We're fortunate that we're able to offer a really good experience at, I believe, a really great price. But if it's important for you, if you want to study abroad, then put that as a priority and make it happen, especially if you realize it early in your academic career. Start working towards that. Put, some money away, even if it's $50, a month. Ask for, parts of it for, gifts and things like that. Summer money put away. And you'll be surprised how quickly you can save up and provide this opportunity. I have not met one of our students that goes on the trip that regrets it. I think people really value the experience once they go. And then I've said it before, but you don't have to be a rec major, any major. And that's one of my favorite parts about it, is because I get to meet new students and I get to expose them to something that is near and dear to my heart. And even more idealistic of me is that if I can show these non-majors an aspect of recreation, because oftentimes in the rec world, we have to explain, well, what is it that you do? But, it is a major life domain. It's part of every community, is some type of parks and recreation. So if I can help expose them to the value of recreation as a societal, institution, then they can, they'll be informed voters. They'll advocate for it because they get it. And for me, I think that's important as well, is to recognize that you don't have to be a rec major. And I like it that way. It's awesome that we have everyone come together, because people put on different lenses as they're interpreting this and gaining this experience. And I think the group experience for our trip is remarkable. And we've talked about it before, but you kind of, that first day is pretty mellow once we're in country. We're all, you fly in, by the time you settle, you get some sleep. The first full day in country, it's pretty mellow. It's kind of that break-in period, adjustment period. But it is that first day of hiking. It's a tough day. We're climbing all day to the top, of this mountain. And we get there, and it's people have pushed themselves, but we're all up there cheering as people come in. We have this big old lunch, which is lunch meats and tomato and some cheese or peanut butter and jelly, but everyone's like, it's such a great lunch. And I think that experience, as soon as we get to the top of the mountain, the group's different. They've come together, they have this shared experience. We walk on down, we camp out that night, and from that point on, our group's different. We've come together, and from that, it's just kind of, we're all kind of moving forward. And I think, again, that's one of the things that I really really cherish. I think about I always, because we get feedback and some students, it's a really tough hike and you think about it, but when you look back on it, you just know that changes the group instantly, and that's the value for what we do. But afterwards, they look back and it gives them sense of like, I've never been backpacking before, let alone now all of a sudden I did that hike, man, I've got this. And it makes them completely comfortable for the rest of the time. And it gives them that sense of confidence of I can do this. And again, I think that's just a small tidbit of the greater study abroad experiences. Now that they've gone abroad and they think about doing it again, yeah, I can do that because I've done it, and now, yeah, I've got this. And man, if every student, or we can get most students who go with us to walk away thinking that, I'm excited. If they remember a few things about ecotourism, and even better. But I think that's the great part.